I will now hand over to my colleague Simone to start the event.
Thank you, Leanne. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this fourth event that we're doing in our Latin American series. Today, after an overall event on the whole region and then very successful events on both Brazil and Mexico, we will actually focus on a whole region. We will look at the Andean region, and I'm very excited to have a very big panel on that afterwards. So as an introduction, I thought, because we probably have some people in the audience that are not that familiar with the sustainable bonds market, I thought I'll give you a bit of an introduction, which will also help when we talk about certain terminology during the panel later on. So at ICMA, the International Capital Market Association, we are actually fortunate enough to manage the secretariat for the principles as they've become to be known. And you can see them. There's green, social, and sustainability bonds, but also sustainability linked bonds. And these are not created by ICMA. These are actually created by a market-led initiative, which consists of issuers, investors, and underwriters in these bonds. So just a little bit of history. The first green bond came out in 2007 already, but the green bond principles were launched in 2014. That's also when the secretariat came to ICMA. And since then, we've also seen the social bond principles being launched in 2017, also the sustainability bond guidelines, which are for a mix between green and social projects. And last year, we have seen the sustainability linked bond principles, and also not new principles, but rather guidance in form of the Climate Transition Finance Handbook. Now, as you can see on the slide, these are not the additions from 2014 and so on, because of course, since then, we have added a couple of new things. So there are updated versions that you can see. And in fact, we have updated the green bond principles and accordingly other principles just this year at our AGM in June. Just to give you a couple of examples as to what was added. So traditionally, the principles have always consisted of 4 core components. And then in 2021, so this year in June, we have added 2 key recommendations. And that was really something that the market had already done. So it's recommended that issuers come out with a bond framework, and also that they get an external review, which mostly takes the form of SPOs, which you will hear during the panel as well. That's a second party opinion. Then we've also highlighted the fact that that transparency is recommended. So not just where does the money go in terms of projects, but also what is the strategy of the issuer. So that's also for so-called use of proceeds bonds. With sustainability linked bonds, the focus is on the strategy of the issuer anyway. And then also that the issuer, promotes transparency on are there any social or environmental risks as well associated with the bonds. As I said, we've also come out with guidance such as the Climate Transition Finance Handbook, and that can be used especially for issuers that are in transition. So in hard to abate sectors such as shipping, mining, so transportation, fossil fuels, anything that is considered not green yet, but that should transition. They can issue a green bond, for example, or a sustainability linked bond, and link that to the guidance in the Climate Transition Finance Handbook. We're also going to talk a bit more about that. This is just an overview on what I just said. So on the left-hand side, you can see the so-called use of proceeds bonds, which is green, social, and sustainability bonds. And you see the core components and the key recommendations. And on the right-hand side, you can see a different type of bond. So these are so-called general corporate purpose bonds, because as I said, the focus is more on the issuer's strategy. And then at the bottom, you can very nicely see that we have thematic guidance that can be used in conjunction with all these instruments. So the principles over the years, I've shown you the history before, they have really become the de facto global standard. And we've looked at that, for last year. And you can see that globally, 97% of bonds issued in the sustainable bond space had actually been aligned to some type of principles. So this is just an overview on the market development, and we will hear more specifically on the region. But this really shows the growth in this market from when the principles came out in 2014. That was just for green bonds. To today, we have different types of sustainable bonds, as you can see, and there's really still a lot of growth. And some people think it's very likely that we actually still reach the 1 trillion issuance mark before the end of the year. So we'll see. I think so too. And it's certainly going to continue next year as well. But hopefully we'll hear more about how this is actually reflected in the region during the panel and also during the following keynote. With that, I'll hand over to our keynote speaker, Isabelle Frédéric Brailly-Cartillier. Over to you, Isabelle.
Thanks, Leanne. So anyway, good morning to everyone. I'd like to thank ICMA for the opportunity. I know I should say ICMA, but in the region we do say ICMA. So I'm gonna stick to the Latin American and Caribbean way of saying it. So my role here is to present a quick snapshot of the sustainable debt market in our region, so that with a focus on the Andean region, and so that you can kick off the conversation you're going to have in the panel. What I will present is coming from my experience with issuing thematic bonds in the region, but more importantly from that report that you see here, that has been published by the Climate Bond Initiative earlier this year with the support of the IDB and the IFC. We will share the link to the report in the follow-up email that you will receive after the event. Very quickly, why am I here to present this to you? So I'm a financial specialist in the Capital Markets Division of the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB. So the IDB is one of the largest lenders in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have a public window where we support public entities, sovereign, public banks, public utilities, etc. And we have a private window called the IDB Invest. So as a group, we started in 2016 to support potential issuers of thematic bonds in the region, private and public. And so this is what we do to help the development of the thematic bond markets in the region. First, we do have financial products. We do anchor investments. We do provide guarantee to issuance when it's needed. We can provide warehousing lines and B-bonds. But we also provide a lot of technical assistance. So we help issuers to get ready to issue thematic bonds. So we help them prepare the framework. We help them get the SPO, that second party opinion that Simon was mentioning. We help them a lot with monitoring and evaluation, because one of the strongest commitments of an issuer of a thematic bond is to report. We work also a lot on the market development itself. So we work a lot with other stakeholders, regulators, stock exchanges, the academia, to develop standards and to develop incentivization of the market. And the last thing, and maybe our flagship product, is we launched this year the Greenbone Transparency Platform, which is a platform that helps the entire community. So it's aimed at both investors and issuers. And it's a platform where you can see the bonds, the green bonds that have been issued, and see in a standardized manner the impact, the green impact that they have. Yes. So very quickly, I'm going to pass very quickly on this one, but just to show you, we have supported 30% of the volume so far in Latin America and the Caribbean. Here is a snapshot of what we've done with public issuers in our region, Andean region. The focus we're going to have today, You can see Colombia. We've worked with Bancoldex, Indeter, and the government of Colombia, who just issued their first green bonds. We worked with Ecuador. Ecuador was the first ever country to issue a social bond in 2020. We've worked in Peru with COFIDE, and we work in Chile. I'm finishing with the first one. We worked in Chile with the government to for them to issue their first green bonds and then social and sustainable. This is our private window. So IDB Invest, they do exactly the same thing for private issuers. And you can see they've also been helping Colombia issuers, Ecuador, Peru, and a very quick snapshot on the Greenbone transparency platform, because I think it's of interest for everybody to log in and go and see it. So it's been, we will share the link also at the end of the seminar. The Greenbone transparency platform has been launched in 2020. And so far, I think we have more than 50 plus issuers. I do have this somewhere. We have 50 plus issuers and 120 issuances already in the platform. Our aim is to have the entire market. This is for green bonds, and it's a way to look at the bond and its impact in a very standardized manner. This is the last thing I wanted to mention. We have this Green Finance Slack platform. It's a knowledge sharing platform. So everything we do is in there. You have a lot of publication. We try to gather all the knowledge we have on thematic bonds in the region. So again, it may be of interest. So just to conclude on this, what we're doing is we're trying to support the development of the thematic bond markets in the region with the highest standards. So when Simone was talking about the ICMA principle, we would not support a bond that is not aligned with the ICMA principle. We would always push for CBI certification, Climate Bond Initiative certification when it's available. And we are only supporting bonds that will commit to a robust reporting post-issuance. So now onto the market itself. So basically what we can say is Latin American and the Caribbean thematic bond market is following the global trend, which is a huge growth. So green bond issuances in the region doubled in between two reports, so in between 2019 and June 2021. And sustainable and social bond also surged. Of course, social bonds were a very powerful tool for countries and for issuers of all kinds to finance the needs created by the pandemic. So social bonds had a huge growth in 2020, and the trend is keeping up. So basically the message here is the market in Latin America is following the global trend and even doing better. We are still a very small portion of the global market, but our portion is growing. So we used to be 2% of the sustainable debt market, and last time I checked, we were 3.6%. So we are outperforming the global trend. Snapshot 2, the three main markets in our region are Chile by far, and you'll have Patricio Sepulveda in the panel to talk about this particular market, Brazil and Mexico. Three countries with three different profiles. Chile very much dominated by the sovereign issuances, Brazil very corporate, and Mexico is a mix. Here you see the figures. What I can say here is that we now have 14 countries issuing thematic bonds in the region. The number is growing. As you can see, the green bond market, and the same as the global market, green bond is still the big chunk and will stay like this. What's very important to mention maybe is that during the pandemic, the green bonds trend didn't, the green bond issuances didn't fall. It stayed at its level, which really is a proof that this subsegment is here to stay. Social really kicked off during the pandemic and are confirming the importance in 2021, and the same for sustainability. Okay, here what I want to highlight is that we have more and more countries issuing, and that every country has a different profile. So if you look at the right-hand side, if you look at Chile, as I was saying, Chile is very much for the moment dominated by the sovereign, but Ecuador is dominated by financial institutions. Brazil is a very corporate market. So each country has its very specific, and meaning that the instrument is a good fit for many different situations. Here, I want to go very quick, but what you can see is a lot of yellow, and the yellow is the energy sector. So you can still see that in all countries, energy sector is still a big part of the green bond markets. Obviously, it's the easiest, I will say. But what you can see here is on the three main markets, which are Brazil, Chile, and Mexico, you see much more diversification. And so my message here is that that's one of the reasons we see so much potential for thematic bonds in the market, in the region, and in the Andean region, is that there's a lot of sectors. There are a lot of sectors that have been untapped yet in those countries. So a lot of potential for growth. Here, we've looked at two different things. First, the average deal size. And that's really interesting because one of the barrier or perceived barrier for issuers to enter the market is size. There was this perception that if you didn't have a portfolio of, at the beginning when I started working on this market, was a portfolio of at least 300 million or 500 million, because it was only an international market. And that has changed a lot. Smaller deals do work. There's a lot of appetite for them. And there's also a lot of appetite for smaller deals in local markets. So this is a message that I want to pass, that smaller deals are worth looking at. And on the right-hand side, and I'm sure my colleague from Sustainalytics in the panel will elaborate on that, is we looked at the external verification. As Simone was mentioning, it is now in black and white in the ICMA principle that you need a framework and you need an external revision. And what I see in the market is that there is now less and less issuances going out in the market without an external revision. The gray you see are mainly for countries that have sporadic issuances. It's not really, you can't really see a trend. But again, if you look at the three main markets, Brazil, Chile, and Mexico, very little gray. So most of the issuance go with external review. The next three slides, I was talking about the green bond market, which is the principal sub-market, I would say. The next three slides are on social and sustainable. And what I have to say is actually a little bit of the same. You see the same growth trend. It is true that on social and sustainable, the importance of sovereign issuances is even more. But we do see a little bit of diversification when the markets mature. So same kind of trend. I don't know if we can pass to the next slide. Have a look at the difference by country. Again, you see more diversification. On those two, social has been, because it started with a pandemic, has been pretty much dominated by sovereign, because it's such a good instrument for them to very quickly be able to finance the needs for emergency and recovery from the pandemic. And I'm not going to stay on this. This one just shows that, you know, the market, the three main markets are the same than the green bond market: Chile, Mexico, and Brazil. There's maybe a little bit less of Brazil and a little more Mexico. And here is the detail of our four countries. So Chile is by far the largest. A lot of issuances from the sovereign, which is done green, social, and sustainable. I had in mind that 20% of the debt of Chile, the Chile sovereign was now sustainable, but I read somewhere that it's 40% and I didn't do the math. So Patricio Sepulveda will probably confirm that. But Chile is one of the best examples in the world for sovereign sustainable debt, and I'm sure Patricio will have a lot to share. Colombia was at the beginning very much a financial institution market with a lot of innovative instruments. Some banks like Bancoldex issued a orange bond, which is for the creative industries. I think Bancolombia, I'm not sure if it's Bancolombia, but one of the banks were one of the first to issue a gender bond. So a lot of innovation in that market. What you don't see here is a very recent issuance from the government. So the Republic of Colombia issued the first green bonds on the local market recently, like 2 months ago. And they use a very innovative model, which is what we used to call the German model, which I'm going to call the Colombian model now, and which is a twin model. You issue a green bond and a plain vanilla bond at the same time, so that you can improve liquidity. So very interesting market in Colombia. And since then, when the sovereign issues, usually the market does, it is dynamized. And we've seen 3 or 4 issuances already since the sovereign issuance. Ecuador was it's a very incipient market, but was the first ever social sovereign bond that we actually worked on with Ecuador. It was for social housing, very interesting bond. And Peru, also incipient with financial institution, and recently the government, we issued sustainable bonds. Okay, so just to conclude, this is maybe my takeaways and maybe to be discussed in the panel. The role of the sovereign issuer is really important. When they start issuing, the market follows. Thematic bonds do have a really good impact on local capital markets. And we've seen this in many different countries in the region. Local taxonomies and any other regulatory incentives have a big impact too. So all the stakeholders have a role to play. The market is maturing. I'm not sure the word is appropriate, but the market is developing, and now there's an appetite, growing appetite for smaller deals and for local currency, which is for us IDB a very, very good sign. Sustainability linked bond, and I haven't touched on them yet because we don't have any of those issuances yet in our Andean region. They do represent a lot of potential for new sectors and for sectors in transition. And then to conclude, the Andean region still have a lot of room for growth. Some very sustainable sectors are still untouched. We're working on the water sector, for example. They have beautiful green portfolio that could be leading to very nice issuances. So there's still a lot of potential in this region. And with this, I will leave space to the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I thought that was a very informative presentation. I hope the audience thought so too. And we will certainly be able to follow up on a lot that you mentioned during the panel now. With that, you can see the esteemed panel listed here. It's a very big panel, but that also means we will have a lot of very interesting views. So I'll just go by the order that's on the slide. So Carlos Arcila Barrera, he's an academic, adjunct professor at the School of Management Center for Sustainable Finance at the Universidad de los Andes. Then we have the underwriter side represented by Daniel Krakian from Scotiabank, who focuses on Latin America there. Then we have another Daniel, or rather Daniel Vicente Ortega Pacheco. So he is director with the Sustainable Finance Initiative of Ecuador. So be able to talk about that country specifically as well. Then, of course, always very interesting to have an investor on the panel as well. And I'm pleased to have Julio Obeso, who is a portfolio manager for the Regio Fund at HSBC. Sustainalytics was already mentioned by Isabel. We have Maria Pilar Salazar, who also covers sustainable finance solutions at Sustainalytics for the region, so an external reviewer. And last but not least, we've certainly heard Chile mentioned a lot in Isabel's presentation. I'm very pleased to have Patricio Sepulveda, who is head of the Chilean Ministry of Finance's Debt Management Office. So he can talk a lot about the issuances that Chile did as an issuer there. Well, Isabel has just given us a bit of an overview on the region, but I'd like to perhaps to start us off, ask Carlos again. As the academic on the panel, you have a very good overview on the region as well, and you will also later on talk a bit more about Colombia specifically. But if you could just tell us, you know, a little bit more about what you see in the region.
Yeah, Simone, so good morning, everyone, afternoon, if it's Europe, or night in Asia. Thank you so much for ICMA, Spanish ICMA, for this invitation, and IFC. And thank you to all the speakers today. It's a pleasure to have you here. And Isabel, thank you for your overview. Really good. I think I will just complement some part on the academic side. When I started looking at this market in Latin America in 2017, it was a very small market. The knowledge, the education was very small. And in that moment, I remember Bancoldex was issuing the first green bond in Colombia. And today, not only in the region, but in the world, we just set a new high water marks, crossing the 3 trillion. And Latin America is playing still, it's small, but it's still growing in the sustainable debt market. Just to point out some interesting points different from the great presentation of Isabel, I would like to point out that Latin American issuances in the sustainable debt market is very diverse. Not only in the type of institution that issue in each country, as in Colombia, very focused on financials. In Chile, the main issuances has been the government. In Brazil is non-corporate financial, but also a little bit of the change that happened in the last 2-3 years that this market has been growing. Before, in 2018, most of the issuances used to be between 5 to 10 years. And even though now it represents 34% and the great majority, the market is changing to the 10 to 20 years that right now can represent around 30% of the issuances. Another important point is the development in national taxonomy. And I want to point out in that case, Colombia, that it was a key development for the first sovereign green bond in the country. Colombia is a very particular country if you compare with the region. First, because most of our issuances has been in local currency. And one of the reasons of that is our local fixed income market, and especially our sovereign fixed income market is quite strong, is the biggest and most liquid one. And the issuances from sovereign to financial has been mostly in pesos. And that is quite different from other countries like Chile or Brazil, Mexico, that have issued in other currencies. But more interesting is to see the growth in local currency from other countries as Brazil. Talking a little bit about SLBs, I think SLBs are getting a lot of traction, not only in Brazil, where the issuances has been done mostly, but also for the potential in Latin America. And the reason of that is that it creates some flexibility for the issuer to use this proceeds to perform KPIs. When we talk to some corporations and some companies about why they decide to issue an SLB when they already issue a green bond. They say because it gave them more possibilities to be in sustainable KPIs. Just to finish this part, I would like to mention the importance in Colombia on the financial sector. Bancolombia issued the first sustainable bond as a private bank in Colombia. It was a private issuances by the IDB, but it was very interesting because it won the award of the best sustainable debt. And the last trend that I see here is more and more institutions in Latin America are going into the public market. This used to be a market that a lot of insurances used to be just private and one buying, but every time, like, you know, it's interesting to see over the years how all institutions are taking a little bit more risk and going into the public market. So that's the third trend that I will suggest. I want to keep it there. I will touch a little bit more about Colombia, the sectors and industries, but I just wanted to point out those differences that are really interesting in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, for setting the scene for us a little bit more in addition to what Isabel already presented. Let me move on to Patricio. And Patricio, we've already heard in Isabel's presentation a lot about Chile. So obviously today we talk about the whole Andean region, but really in the region as well. Chile is dominant. And not just Chile as a country, but there it's really the sovereign bonds. And you as a sovereign issuer, you have actually issued a lot of different use of proceeds types bonds. So you have experience with green bonds, but also social bonds and sustainability linked bonds. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit more? Also, I think the audience will want to learn from Chile. What's your experience with that? And why do you keep going back to these types of sustainable bonds? Is that now the new normal to issue sustainable bonds?
Yes, of course, Simon. So first, thank you for the invitation. Second, regarding your question, I will start to give you the current situation, and then I will explain how we finalize with this. So currently, I think that we issue about 25.7 billion. I think that we published this in a website. Maybe Isabel, you can update your number, but this is the number that we issue. In fact, we just announced 30 minutes ago a new social bonds that we will issue in the local market in local currency. So it will increase a little bit. It will be about 27 billion of label bonds. And the mix of this is mainly in social bonds, about 17.6 billion, green 7.7, and sustainable bonds is a mix between green and social projects for about 1.5 billion. But all of this represent about 25% of the central government debt. So this is an important share of our debt. And to explain a little bit our experience in this regard, I think that I would like to start first when we began this. We began this in 2018, at the last quarter of 2018. And that time we planned to issue in 2019. And the plan was to see what's happening in the markets. So at that time we issued in 2019 about 2.3 billion equivalent in US dollar, in US and also in euro. And then we continue to issue. In 2020, we issue about 5 billion, a mix between green and also at the end of the year, 2020, we issue for the first time in social bonds. And this year, because of the pandemic situation, we also expand the issuance of social bonds, and we issue about 40 billion of social bonds. And the other was green and also sustainable bonds. And the experience was very, very amazing for us because when we issued in 2019, the ESG participation was very important. It was about 76% for the euro bonds. It was a little bit less For the US investor or the US currency bonds, it was about 40%. But I think that over time, there is not the similar share in terms of US versus Euro, but I think that the interest from the US investor are increasing and try to be more similar than the Euro markets. In terms of the discussion with the investor, I think that for Chile, it was very, very important to explain the story of Chile, because this is, in the case of Chile, the issuance of green bonds and sustainable bonds was not an isolated event. So we have to explain that it's part of the strategy of the government, in the middle of the commitment of the Paris Agreement, the agenda that we have regarding the electromobility in Chile, the energy efficiency, etc. So it was an amazing experience. We expand our investor base. We have the chance to share the strategy, not only of the government, but also of the country regarding the environment protection that we are doing in Chile, also all the sustainable issue or dimension that we have had in Chile for many years, and we would like to continue this different initiative in the social dimension.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So it's interesting to hear that you're using the green bonds to also communicate how those projects are actually helping Chile achieve the national determined contribution, the NDCs. And of course, we've just had COP26, and there will be a much bigger focus on those again next year in Egypt. Can you just briefly also say on the social side, what kind of projects do you finance there?
Sorry, I'm mute. We have a very diversified project. We have an important portion related to the COVID situation. So all the help to the housing, and also to the labor markets is very important. We contemplate about 40% of the social project. And the other one is more related to the traditional social initiative of the government, is essential health services, food security, housing, human rights victims, support for low-income families, and also support to the most vulnerable people, in situation. The pension system also, there is many and very diversified type of social projects.
Indeed, and I definitely want to get back to you a bit later on in the panel to find out how you're actually measuring all of these things when you report on impact, for example. But let me move on to Daniel as the underwriter in the panel. Daniel, we've just heard from the biggest issuer in the region. Carlos has also talked a little bit about Colombia. You, of course, advise a lot of clients in the region. What kind of questions do you get asked, and what do you see in the region? Also, perhaps, what do you observe compared with the rest of Latin America and maybe also globally?
Sure, thank you, Simone, and I'm very happy to be here with all the panelists. So I think, as mentioned at the beginning by Isabel, I mean, we've seen a lot of volume this year, not only globally, but also in Latin America. And I mean, I think that one of the interesting things here is not sort of the exponential increase we've seen in issuances since the COVID-19 pandemic started, but I would say that it's also a change of the composition of the issuances, and I think that's very important to highlight. So green bonds, as I think we saw a graph before, have historically been around 50% or more of the issuances. But this year, we can clearly see how this has changed with social bonds, sustainability bonds, and now SLBs really becoming very important financing tools, and not only for sovereigns, as mentioned by Patricio, but also for corporates, right? And as you said, Scotiabank as one of the leading underwriters in LATAM, we have seen an increased interest from corporates to come to the market, look at different alternatives besides only green bonds, so they can make strong commitments and really showcase their good work they're doing in ESG. And I think, to your question, I think two examples of this are Entel and InterChile, both in Chile. For Entel, which is one of the leading provider of telecommunication services in Chile and Peru, we helped them underwrite a $800 million sustainability bond back in September. So obviously a very novel one because it was the first sustainability bond for a LATAM telco. So a lot of interesting feedback from investors. Obviously, the highlight here were the use of proceeds categories that not only did it have the green traditional categories, renewable energy, energy efficiency, but they also had interesting social categories such as access to basic infrastructure, access to essential services, and a little more general COVID-19 pandemic relief. So as I said, investor feedback was extremely positive. They really liked this structure. I think the bond was about 4.5 times oversubscribed. And having conversations with investors, what they really liked was the really significance of these eligible social projects, basically enabling access to telecom internet services in underserved regions. With clearly defined target populations, which is something extremely important, as Patricio can probably relate to when you talk about social bonds. So very interesting, like novel structure, a lot of positive feedback. And the other example into Chile, which I bring up because it's one of the main electricity transmission companies in Chile, very relevant to the country's ambitions as well. Back in July, we helped underwrite a 1.2 billion green bond, which I believe is the largest green bond from a corporate in LATAM so far. And sort of the same, very, very positive investor feedback. It was, or 2 times oversubscribed. And I think the highlight here, and sort of tying back to what Patricio was saying, the eligible green projects were more focused on sort of creating energy efficient infrastructure for renewable transmission, which really relates to Chile's commitment to carbon neutrality by 2050 and their interim targets as well, 70% renewable power in the matrix by 2030, right? So I think that investors really enjoyed the link between the company's ambitions and also the sovereign. So just quick 2 examples to showcase the appetite from the corporates in the region. They are all trying to make important commitments, meaningful commitments, and they really want to articulate their ESG strategy to the market. And I think we've received positive feedback from investors to support these novel structures. And I think we expect the same coming to 2022, Simon.
Thank you, Daniel. And of course, we'll hear from Julio as the investor on the panel as well. But from your experience with your issuer clients, obviously you also in turn speak to a lot of investors, and you already mentioned them. Do you see that issuers, are these the same investors that they speak to, or is that perhaps a wider audience? Does that give them more access to maybe global investors as well? And is that a new experience for a lot of issuers in Latin America?
No, that's an excellent question. I mean, I would say yes. When we have structured these bonds, it evidently opens up the investor universe. A lot of ESG focused funds and investors come into play. So we had a positive experience, not only in terms of oversubscription, we can also see the benefit in terms of pricing or greeniums across the board. So it opens up a whole new conversation.
Thank you. And of course, something that's very important to investors as well, and I would assume, but again, Julio can confirm that later, is the external review that investors are getting. Let me come to you, Maria Pilar. What is, maybe you can explain a bit more to the audience, what is an SPO, a second party opinion, which is just one type of review that issuers could get. And what's the feedback you hear from perhaps investors? Also, what kind of questions do issuers come to you? Just tell us a little bit more about SPOs and specifically for the Andean region.
Yes, of course. Well, first, thank you, Simone and ICMA for inviting Sustainalytics to the panel. So to take a step back, in their green, social, or sustainable bond frameworks, issuers explain the alignment of their bond program with the 4 components of the green bond principles and social bond principles, which include, as you mentioned at the beginning of the panel, information around use of proceeds, project evaluation and selection, management of proceeds, and reporting commitment, and that in addition to expanding on their sustainability strategy and how the framework is aligned with it. So in the region, investor expectations and market standards have evolved to demand that an external SPO provider, such as Sustainalytics and our peers, review an issuer's framework and act as a sounding board, if you will, to ensure that they are credible, impactful, and aligned with accepted market principles, such as ICMA principles. And on the other hand, on a post-issuance basis, Sustainalytics also works with issuers to ensure that the projects financed are aligned with the intended use of proceeds that were outlined in the bond framework. So just to touch a little bit on sort of like what is the role of Sustainalytics, or more broadly, a second party opinion provider in advancing the sustainable debt market in the Andean region. As previously mentioned, our role in the region is to support issuers and ensure that their bond frameworks are credible and aligned with market principles. And we maintain consistency in the approach to green and social use of proceeds eligibility. But within the SPO, we also cover the contribution of the framework to the issuer sustainability strategy, as well as the impact of the use of proceeds and how it is specifically relevant in the local context. So back to what Danielle was mentioned before, this approach does provide ESG bond investors with relevant information about the region's potential for impact. And one point that I do want to mention is that while the majority of our work in the region has been concentrated in Chile, Peru, and Colombia, we are increasingly seeing more interest in the sustainable finance space from issuers in Ecuador, and not only from financial institutions, as Isabel mentioned at the beginning of the panel, but from corporate issuers more broadly. So I'll make a pause there. I'm happy to expand later on more points, but that is broadly what we're seeing right now.
Thank you, Maria Pilar. And let me bring in the investor in the round, Julio. Can you perhaps tell us why does HSBC invest in so-called GSS bonds, green social sustainability bonds, and more specifically, the Regio one, the Regio fund? What does Regio stand for, and what do you invest in there?
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me. We believe that it's very efficient for an asset manager to invest in global sustainable and social bonds, because if to help, especially like emerging markets in the transition. If you think about it, we have clients that also want to be part of this sustainable and transition for lower CO2 emissions, and emerging markets is around 2/3 of the CO2 emissions in the world, and there's no boundaries, right? So that's basically our main goal, to help our clients to help the economies in the transition. Regio, it's basically invest in EM corporate debt. Regio stands for Real Economy Green Investment Opportunities. It's a fund that was launched 2 years ago, and we are focusing mainly on green and renewable and sustainable debt in emerging markets overall, global emerging markets, and the Andean region and Latin America is one component of that.
And what would you say was your experience in looking at selecting investments as well? What would you say are the do's and don'ts really for issuers, or especially new issuers, or issuers that are thinking of coming to market in emerging markets, and specifically if you have anything for the Andean region, which is perhaps also overall not such a developed debt capital market as well?
Sure, that's a good question. Things that work for investors, overall, we're taking, if you think about it, we're taking another layer of risk on not only the credit side, but also now the uh, the frameworks and the strategies of that these companies or these projects are actually going into. So the very simple, what I'm going to say, but sometimes um, people skip this. The numbers need to add up. The projects need to add up. The projects need to help out to that company transition on their own business strategies. So part of the business development, part of their strategy, part of what they're actually doing. If the company wants to diversify and then be that the source of sustainable and green investments, that also has to be clear from a strategic corporate governance perspective. So that the projects need to add up to the issuance. The projects need to make sense for the issuer. And then the overall kind of like after the issuance, because as a green bond fund, we actually are very concerned about reporting afterwards. So not only the initial stages, because at that point, everything is, if you want to think about it, is just a future promise that we will build this, we will do this. It's really when the work starts is when you do the investment and you need to follow up and you need to engage with the issuers on a yearly basis, trying to follow up with their KPIs, how things are working, if the projects are coming to fruition, if like those projects are adding to the bottom line, to the margins. So it's really, that's when the work starts. The don'ts, so the do's are focus on your strategy, numbers need to add up, makes sense, you are transparent with investors because it will come out in a year or 2 years when you need to report. The don'ts basically is don't try to take shortcuts because it will show up. It's a repetitive game at the end of the day. Basically, investors get to know which structures are weak. Not all green frameworks are created equal. So not all SLBs are created equal. So some of them, you could, from an investor perspective, say they are not as strong as others. So it's better just to be transparent, make sure your numbers are clear, and don't try to cut any corners or try to kind of like, for example, one thing that is clear sometimes, and it was talked about already, the oversubscription. So if you already told me you have projects that line up to 350, and because there's an oversubscription of 3 times, all of a sudden you will be tempted to upsize your issuance. So a 350 might become a 400 or 450 or 500. At that point, it's good for the issuer, but at that point you have lost my credibility, because you were telling me that you had plans only for 350, and now you have to actually come back. If it's really a sustainable bond, an SLB or a green bond, you need to kind of like add up these projects to make up for what you're raising in the markets. So if it's a regular bond, it's fine to basically upsize your on the day of the market because the market is so hot. But if it's a purposely green bond or SLB with KPIs, don't upsize on the day of the market because then the credibility is gone.
That's very good to know. And you mentioned a strong versus perhaps a not so strong or weak bond frameworks. What makes a strong bond framework? What do you really want to see in there?
That's a good point. So the types of things that qualify for renewable energy, as I said, I've done deals not only in Latam but also in Asia and CEMEA, and sometimes the way they want to the interpretation of the framework itself. The framework is just a guideline. The SPOs are only giving you a recommendation or a view on the framework, not on the structure of the bond. The structure of the bond uses the framework, but it has a lot of leeway to move away from it. So, for example, in SLBs, if you have, let's say, a 10-year bond structure, and you have your KPIs starting being measured on year 8, and if you don't reach your goals by year 9, then there's a step up of the last coupon. That's a bit weak, given that there's not really any punishment because the bond could be called before then. So it's really not, there's no There's no incentive to do much. If you have the same bonus structure and you have same project, 10 years, and you start measuring it gradually, not necessarily reaching your KPI, but gradually by year 4 or 5, then you gain more credibility. But those deals are hard to come by. The deals that are easier to see, or you can see on a hot market, because let's be real, there's more demand than supply, are the ones that are kind of like on the weaker side. So as an investor, with engagement, we give that feedback to the markets, to the issuers, kind of like in these kind of forums, to basically create a win-win for our investors and for the capital markets and for the issuers themselves. So we're trying to basically improve with engagement what's happening in the markets.
Thank you. It's very good to know. And we've obviously heard from Patricio. It's a very prominent issuer in the market. Chile has issued a lot. But let me come to you, Daniel, and maybe Carlos after again, to talk a little bit more about other countries in the Andean region who are early issuers, who probably haven't issued yet, who are contemplating issuance. What do you see there, and what are they perhaps struggling with, or what does help? Daniel, you first.
Well, hi everyone, and thank you for this invitation. It's truly an honor to join this panel. I will say that there is clear evidence of policy innovations and market actions across Andean countries. As a matter of fact, Chile and Colombia has a marked leadership on progress, and there is a well balance between private and public sector engagement in both countries. In general, our ongoing research from the Sustainable Finance Initiative at Ecuador shows that most of the Andean countries has formally launched a sustainable finance framework, including national roadmaps, frameworks, policy, voluntary industry principles, or guidance. And in some cases, like in Ecuador, a formal task force or initiative in charge, either within the regulator or banking association, or as a multi-stakeholder working group or platform, which is acknowledged or supported by both regulators and industry. Awareness raising and capacity building has been conducted, and multilateral banks as the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, I should say that they lead these efforts. More recently, though, the Latin American Development Bank, formerly known as the Andean Development Corporation, has announced a new green bond issuance. They have established a green bond program back since 2018, and more recently in 2020, a social bond program, which marks up to $2 billion portfolio. And I think that can be transformational in terms of the Andean countries' capacity to engage in large infrastructure and energy projects. The global efforts associated to the Build Back Better, the COVID economic recovery, show a fertile ground also to mobilizing interest in potential increase of Andean countries' green, social, and sustainability-linked bonds. The asset quality will be a key differentiating factor on top of substantial developing impact that these financial instruments can derive for the region. Finally, in the case of Ecuador and Bolivia, I will highlight that the private sector has undisputedly taken the lead in advancing the development of sustainable finance in the capital market. The Quito Stock Exchange and the Bolivia Stock Exchange both have issued guidance for green bond issuance in line with the green bond principles. On top of that, Ecuador does have a sustainable finance initiative that I'm honored to chair and lead. We have received support from the IFC, which actually reflects on some of the outcomes that the country has been able to achieve, both with private green bond issued in 2018 and a sovereign social bond issued in 2020 by support of the IDB. But I should also highlight, though, that a pipeline of about 700 million in green bonds or sustainability-linked bonds will be issued during 2022. So I do agree with Isabel that there are opportunities to explore, in particular for in Ecuador, let's say that we have a currency, our currency is the dollar. So these small deals in local market is something worth to look at. We expect that Bolivia will continue to make progress and hopefully will achieve its first emission by early 2021.
And we've heard Julio mention transition finance a lot. Do you just have a brief view on transition finance for the region?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I can. it is important to understand that labor impacts of a transition to a net zero emission economy by 2030 represents 1.6 million jobs for the Andean region. Energy and agriculture are the largest contributing sectors. So considering infrastructure needs and post-COVID recovery, the supranationals can play a critical role in greening fiscal strategies given their access to global market. Fiscal deficits are fueling higher public debt ratios in the region. In a conservative scenario, just to give you a figure, public debt will increase from 58% in 2019 to 76% of GDP in the average country by 2023. That debt service projections are continued to increase from 5 to 6.5 in GDP. So this analysis underscores the need for countries to adjust without sacrificing growth or sustainability. In this context, thematic bonds may offer an interesting alternative to finance, refinance, or even restructuring sovereign debts with a paradigmatic shift to sustainability. Infrastructure play a fundamental role, and that in economic and social recovery of Andean countries, thematic bonds may facilitate a planned portfolio of priority projects with adequate pre-investment and attractive to private investors. Just in the road sector, you can have about 70% of that portfolio. Energy would cover about 20%, and then electric railways and telecommunications taking part on the rest. With marked differences from the European integration, however, the Andean community of countries may contribute to promote and streamline a regional strategy for sustainable finance, including perhaps some common elements for taxonomies and regulation actions on climate risk management, ESG integration, awareness raising, and capacity building for sustainable finance.
Thank you. And of course, in the Andean region, like in the whole region, there are a lot of sectors that need to transition in order to reach the climate goals. Carlos, we've already heard a little bit about Colombia as well. And in fact, Isabel mentioned that they have adopted the German concept of issuing a twin bond. Very interesting. Can you talk a little bit more just about Colombia and also maybe also on transition finance as to what you see there and in the region?
Absolutely. So let me start with the transition, because transition is key not only for Colombia but for a lot of countries in the Andean region. As you know, most of our exports are in fossil fuels. And it's not only about financing transition, but also understanding what is our transition risk as a country, as an economy. And that's where a lot of academia and a lot of research is starting to be done. We are analyzing what is the transition risk for systemic financial risk. We are trying to understand how our companies and the markets can be impacted. So that is a really key part to later see and use all these instruments into the transition risk, but it's huge and it's important. Let me touch a little bit about Colombia, and I would like to point out what Daniel Gracian said here about diversification. Diversification is a key in the region, but not only in the instruments as they are issuing more, but also in the use of proceeds and projects they are using. The first Colombian sovereign green bond, it was very interesting because the use of proceeds was 40% used in water, 27% for clean transportation, 14% for biodiversity, 16%, for biodiversity, and only 14% for energy. And that is very interesting because it changed a little bit what you used to think about green bonds and the majority of use of proceeds that is going to energy. So this is key. Second part, I will say that new participants are entering. For example, Bogota, the district of Bogota just issued the first social bond in local markets in a program that is promoted by the exchanges. With Daniel Ortega mentioned, the exchanges are playing a key role in the Andean country. So this is very interesting because not only the country as a sovereign, but also now cities are issuing some instrument that this social bond that will be used for education in the low income young people. finally, I would like to mention another sector that is key. I think not only for Colombia, but for all Latin America, the Andean, and including, I would like to include Brazil. That is agriculture. Sustainable agriculture is key, and those instruments can help to close that gap in financing this sector. Why? First, agricultural Latin American exports represent over 25% of agriculture in the world. Second, sustainable agriculture can have a huge impact in climate change and in our commitments. But at the same time, the challenge is sustainable agriculture requires long-term financing. And if you look at the challenges, and not to mention the risk that the region has with climate change and agriculture that we start to see and explore. So this is another sector very interesting to focus on, and where these instruments can play a key role in financing. And just to finish, another point that I would like to see and to talk is about the benefits of issuing this type of instrument, and especially when you hear about this greenium and this cost. And I would like to mention that this is not the only benefit if it's not the focus when you issue a green bond. Issuing a green bond has broad benefits more than just the cost. That greenium exists because what Julio said, there is over demand, but really you shouldn't issue a green bond just because of that cost, but more than the benefit. For example, in Colombia and Bancoldex, when Bancoldex issued the green bond, it brought the group of potential investors who invest in this instrument, and that's a huge benefit for any issuer. It brought a potential investor that they have. Also, the transparency and the reputation, as Julio mentioned, that can help you for your brand reputation, but also most of these institutions, and especially in Colombia, that most of these banks has equity and public equity, can help also in other aspect of the company, in sustainability indexes, ESG indexes, in KPIs, so the benefits are more than just cost. That's an important message that I wanna point out. And finally, technology. Technology plays a key here in transparency, and reporting is key. Again, I want to mention what Julio said from the investor side. Reporting, transparency is key for the investor. And when an investor buy a bond, they don't only buy it, but they follow, and they want to keep seeing what's going on with the action and with this bond and with the use of proceeds. So technology plays a key role in the region in transparency. The IDB platform and the other initiative can help with that. So technology, different sectors, the growth, I think this is a tremendous opportunity for the region to finance the long-term development and sustainability of the region.
Yeah, thank you. And technology and fintech especially is also taking an increasing role in impact reporting. And reporting, of course, is one of the pillars that I've shown earlier of the principles. And impact reporting within that is becoming increasingly important to investors. Now, Patricio already alluded to that earlier. You have a lot of different kinds of projects, be it social, be it green, be it mix in sustainability linked sustainability bonds. How are you going about impact reporting on all of those? How do you follow that? Have you also yet resorted to using drones and geospatial technology and things like that? Or do you go about it in a very traditional way?
I think that in a traditional way, but I think that I would like to highlight that effectively the report is the key element here for the credibility of issuer like Chile. I suppose for any issuer of ESG instrument is very, very important, this dimension. So in the case of Chile, we have a very strong process for the selection of the projects because we know that ex post we have to report the impacts allocation, but also the allocation report. So we have to analyze ex ante the capacity that we have in the government with the ministry to monitorize effectively all the expenditure, all the transfer for any of the projects that we are incorporate in the different bonds. So at the moment we issue a report in 2020 for the bond, the green bond that we issued in 2019, and also this year we issue a second report for the bond that we issued 2019 and 20. In the majority of the projects are most related to the clean transportation. So it is a little bit more simple because there are a big size of project. Not too much is basically the construction of metro line, also some railroad from the railroad company here in Chile, state-owned company. And the other projects are more related to renewable energy, green building, and water management. And so for those, the size and the percentage, for example, for the renewable energy is only 0.3% of our portfolio. So we would like to continue to incorporate this. Maybe some person can recommend to not include this because the cost to include this, it could be a little bit high than the size in the portfolio, but we would like to incorporate this because I understand that it's good for the investor universe of ESG universe to have a very diversified portfolio in our portfolio of products. Second, related to the social bonds, we have to polish the report next year. So it's also an important, I know that is a challenge because we already have identified not all the projects that we can incorporate and follow the criteria of ICMA standard, but only the project that we know that we have the capacity to report the allocation and also the impact. So we identify, we know all the projects, and we are ready to publish the report next year. But it's an important challenge, and it's very important to make this very carefully and to explain, for example, if they have some delay in the implementation of some project. For example, in the case of the metro line construction, we have some delay in the construction because of the COVID situation. So we have to explain this in the report. We have also to explain the impact, etc. So we try to be very complete, also in some way friendly in terms of the explanation in the impact and also the allocation. And at the moment, we receive very good feedback from the investor related to our report. We hope that it will continue in the future, but it's a key element, the report. I know maybe going forward with the question of or thematic of the SLB, I think that is it's another way to access to the market for sovereign. We understand that no sovereign have issue SLB. For us, it's important to analyze this possibility. We are not for the moment take the decision to go with this instrument, but I think that have the pros and cons. In the case of allocation, we don't have to report the allocation report, but the impact report will be very important. And also the definition of the KPI is the key element on this. So I think that is for us is something that we try to push this year or next year in our debt management office.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly, as we've already said numerous times, you have a lot of experience, and it sounds like you're gaining a very increasing experience with impact reporting as well. So what's next for you? You just mentioned SLBs. Would that be something for Chile to issue? Could you be the first one to issue that? Would that be perhaps in the cards?
It could be, because, for example, every year we have a committee that analyze the project that we can include in to issue green bond, for example, and we have some some analysis of the project, the metro line. We have to check with the budget office, for example, of the new metro line in Chile's number 9. But they mentioned that for the moment we are in the process of analysis, but it's not already approved. So we have some limits in this regard to incorporate in the traditional scheme of use of proceeds. So the SLB, I think that it could be a new approach in order to comply with the commitment of the country and the government to reach, for example, the NDC goals, or to reach, for example, the conversion of the carbon plants, or the close of carbon plants in Chile, or to have some goal in terms of renewable energy in the country. I think that it could be a good way to continue with the commitment of the government of the country and to avoid the limitation of the use of proceeds scheme, because many of the measures that implement the government of the country is more related to regulation. It's more related to, for example, taxes. It's more related to some strategy or some some coordination with the public and the private institution in terms to reach the goal. So I think sometimes it could be better to establish the goal in terms of, or to issue instrument that will be related to some key KPI that will, of course, challenge KPI for the country than the traditional use of proceed. Or maybe we can continue to make a mix between green or sustainable bonds with the use of proceeds scheme, and together with the other SLB instruments that could be very useful to maintain and to incorporate this instrument for sovereign and for the audience, ESG audience, that is more and more interest in this kind of instruments.
We will certainly follow this and watch this space with great interest to see if Chile will issue an SLB. Daniel, when you have your clients come to you and wanting to considering issuing an SLB, what do you talk to them about specifically for KPIs? And the key performance indicators also have to be calibrated to sustainability performance targets. What is important there? Because obviously they have to be ambitious, which might not always be easy to determine for an issuer. What's your advice there? Or also what's your experience with clients?
Sure. So, I mean, evidently also I'm very excited to see if Chile comes out with an SLB next year. We want to be monitoring that for sure. I mean, from a corporate space, you know, I mean, SLBs have definitely taken off globally. I think we hit a new record in November, almost 21 billion. Year to date, I think we have over 100 billion, and it's not an exception in LATAM. I think we have reached about 13 billion in issuances this year. So evidently, I think that this is extremely encouraging because I think, as Carlos said before, it's not only the year-over-year increase in volume, but you have seen a variety of industries coming into this market. So, I mean, manufacturing, food and beverage, chemicals, cosmetics. I mean, it's a great sign that sustainable finance is becoming more inclusive. And we are seeing this in our day-to-day conversations with issuers from multiple industries, and many of them might not have specific green projects, so they really look to different instruments. And to your point and your question, I think the most important part is, first of all, they embrace ESG and sustainability principles today. So they have a very thought out plan, and they have done the groundwork to access the SLB market. We feel that sometimes issuers might just think about different KPIs so they can go out quickly to the market. Our advice is definitely to have a well thought out plan that aligns closely to their ESG strategy, right? Because this will be communicated to investors. And I think that in terms of KPIs, it varies a lot between different industries, right? I think that something that we definitely want to see are some KPIs tied to environmental KPIs, meaning emissions is extremely important, especially given the net zero targets for 2050. But then at the end, after this KPI, which is important and we usually recommend, I think that other KPIs should be telling the story the issuer wants to tell the market. I mean, if diversity and inclusion is extremely important, then that should be a KPI they should put. If governance is extremely important, that's something they should include. So we really advise issuers to make the KPIs in the SLB just an extension of their underlying ESG strategy of the company, instead of just putting KPIs they think that investors would like. Because at the end of the day, and I think Julio touched upon this, investors will dig deep. They will look beyond the framework, and they want to see that the story that the issuer is telling is aligned across the board. So quickly is the summary, Simone, but I think that's probably what we would advise.
Thank you. And in the interest of time, we have to be brief. I mentioned in the beginning that there is also the Climate Transition Finance Handbook. Maria Pilar, do you see an increase in issuers aligning their frameworks to the handbook? And do you think that helps? And is that easy for you to evaluate as well?
Yes, absolutely. So the Climate Transition Finance Handbook, as you mentioned, Simone, is in fact a crucial tool to enable global adherence to the Paris Agreement targets, and does provide an avenue for carbon-intensive issuers to enter the sustainable finance market and develop a credible path to decarbonization. So our work has been primarily with issuers in Latin America, primarily Brazil and Mexico, as it comes to sort of incorporating the Climate Transition Finance Handbook. So to expand on that, at Sustainalytics, we view the handbook as representative of market expectations for issuers that have material involvement in activities that are in need to transition. And we started incorporating it within our second party opinion and apply it as an additional layer of assessment for issuers seeking to issue either a use of proceeds or sustainability linked bond. So just to provide an example, Sustainalytics has recently worked on the SLB framework second party opinions for CEMEX and Volaris, both cement and aviation sectors, and it evaluated the climate transition strategy and governance, and in addition, right, to the intentions to report and transition, and based on that, determine the alignment with the Climate Transition Finance Handbook and sort of like the guidelines that the handbook presents. So we do believe that this handbook is especially crucial and will be applied to issuers in Latin America. But to provide an example, aviation, we have many potential issuers in aviation in the Andean region that could potentially benefit from that, and something that definitely we're starting to work more on issuers in the region.
Thank you, Maria Pilar. And as the last one in the panel, let me come to Julio again. The Climate Transition Finance Handbook, is that helpful? You already mentioned SLBs, you already mentioned transition. Does it give SLBs more credibility? Does it help you to evaluate better if an issuer strategy is ambitious?
Yes, the short answer is yes. But like I think also other panelists are saying, everything needs to make sense. It's not just because it's something that is trendy. It's just it needs to make sense. It needs to add value to the company. The framework needs to make sense. One thing that I like is each issuer is at a different stage, so they should be true to where they want to move from point A to point B. In their business, in the transition, in their ESG. If they have an issue, for example, with diversity in the labor force, they should try to address that in a KPI. Other issuer might not have that issue, so it doesn't make any sense for them to do that. So yes, any frameworks or guidelines that are actually well explained and why they're using those, and if all that framework actually makes sense for the business and also for the transition goals, for us is the most welcome, as well as the transparency along the process after the issuance. That's basically what we like the most.
Thank you, Julio. And with that, we have actually come to an end. There would still be more that we could, of course, discuss. We haven't even touched on things like regulation, which I'm sure has an impact on the region as well. But it was important, first of all, to cover, the basic ground on issuance, and hopefully the audience has learned a little bit from all your responses as well. With that, let me thank all the panelists. Let me thank our keynote speaker, Isabel, again. And for everyone in the audience, this will become available as a recording, and you can watch that back as well. Let me also just point out, I gave you a brief introduction in the beginning, sort of a whistle-stop tour on what are the principles. But if you would like to learn more about all of that, if you work in that space or just want to understand a little bit more, we also have courses that you can find on our website. And with that, again, thank you, everyone. Wish you a good rest of the day. And we will also send you a feedback form. We'd be really grateful if you could respond, give us your honest response. We want to learn from that as well. Yeah, with that, thank you for watching. Thank you, speakers, and hopefully see you soon at another LATAM event.